I'm Lauren Gunter. Thanks for joining us for this significant Sun News investigation. This summer, a natural disaster struck more than 30 communities in my home province of Alberta. The destruction was on a scale that's hard even to comprehend. But in the middle of that heartbreaking loss of life and property, an equally disturbing event occurred. An incident that calls into questions the actions and motives of the RCMP. Indeed, there's even an ongoing investigation into what Mounties did by the Independent Commission for Public Complaints against the RCMP. Something went horribly wrong this summer in Alberta. In the fog of disaster, was a dangerous line crossed? A public trust betrayed? As you're about to see, certainly hundreds, likely thousands of residents of one Alberta town would say, yes, it was.
This is an Alberta emergency alert. Town of High River has issued a high water level alert. This alert is in effect for High River. Highwood River has caused serious flooding in High River. If you are in the affected area, evacuate immediately.
This is a major disaster we're dealing with. It's at the same level as the Slave Lake fire that devastated that community. That's what we're dealing with, and that is a major reason we cannot have residents return to the town of High River. It is simply not safe to be there.
We were depending on our government and our police to protect us. And that is what you said you were doing by keeping us out of the town. But by booting in our doors and taking our things, you made us feel less safe. And in fact, you also made us, in effect, less safe, because now we were vulnerable to looters.
You know, it makes me lose faith in our RCMP that they can just kind of go over our heads and go in and just kind of search and root around people's homes. I've heard a lot of different stories. I don't know what's true or not, but I know my story's true.
I want to know what gave you the right to come to my house and look for something that belongs to me. I want to hear more about the whole gun issue. Doors be damned, I had one of them too. I want to know about the guns.
I don't want to get this person in trouble, but when I asked him why 2 of my doors were booted in that weren't locked, he gave me a wry little smile and he said, "Les, there's no better feeling than booting in a door."
This was something that was completely out of our control, unexpected, and what I'm so proud of is how quickly evacuations worked and emergency management agencies came together to provide the support they needed to protect people and to protect property.
Protect people and protect property. The completely proper and expected role of our democratic governments, especially in a crisis situation. And what a crisis it was. The flash flooding that swept over southern Alberta in June is now considered to be the worst natural disaster in Canadian history. Just imagine the power that came sweeping across this farmer's field, picked up this railroad that used to sit on this rail bed, and shoved it down this slope. Unfortunately, among all the pain and suffering of this natural calamity emerged stories of a self-inflicted wound, a potential offense against the most important check and balance that exists in a democracy, the balance of power between law-abiding citizens and those we trust to enforce the law on behalf of the government. As a journalist, it's my job to investigate the possibility of such a breach of trust taking place. But more importantly, as a Canadian, I need to understand what happened here in High River. This town is as apple pie Albertan as it gets. 13,000 residents with a full-service hospital, a regional airport, a bustling little economy that includes one of the country's few scandal-free meatpacking operations. It's even the panoramic shooting location for CBC's popular Heartland series. And most importantly, it boasts engaged citizens who have an active interest in their community. This isn't some droopy little hamlet that's out of sight and out of mind. Many people commute to work in Calgary, which concerns me greatly, because if a fundamental breach of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms happened here, in this provincial Pleasantville, then it could happen in any town, big or small, in any province. As you'll see, our investigation has uncovered disturbing new evidence in the form of police documents showing that the RCMP purposely crossed a very dangerous line. But how could such a disturbing act possibly take place? When disaster struck hard last June, states of emergency were declared across most of southern Alberta.
Folks, this is the Calgary Police Service.
The province's Emergency Management Act gives added power to police and officials so they can protect people and property. And in every case, those powers were used appropriately and then withdrawn, except perhaps right here, where High River reportedly became an authoritarian Disneyland. For instance, why did officials adopt an infrastructure first, people last approach after insisting the town of 13,000 be completely emptied and locked down, essentially placed under martial law? Almost every single home was systematically entered and searched, sometimes more than once, even homes that weren't flooded. Forced entry was required in nearly half of those searches. Yet the RCMP and governments refused to accept financial responsibility for the damage done to nearly 1,900 homes until residents went public in a raucous meeting a few months later. And of course, there was the seizure by Mounties of firearms from more than 100 of those homes, an infamous event that's become known as the High River gun grab. All this, it seems, is the result of a perfect storm, and not just the weather kind. No one who was here during the floods will forget what they witnessed. I'll never forget it, even from my safe and dry vantage point at the Edmonton Sun. I couldn't believe what was happening to my fellow Albertans as town after town sank beneath unexpected flash floods. Until finally, and most astonishingly of all, the entire downtown core of our civic rival to the south simply went dark. The effect on communities large and small was overwhelming. At least 25,000 homes from Calgary to Medicine Hat were damaged, hundreds beyond repair. Rail lines were picked up and twisted like licorice ropes. Whole parking lots of cars and buses were submerged. $1-million homes were swamped by rivers that had been trickling creeks the night before.
Southland Leisure Center.
Another 31 municipalities declared states of emergency in a disaster the Insurance Bureau of Canada and the Alberta government estimate could cost, in the end, $5 billion or more, making the Alberta floods of 2013 even costlier than the Quebec ice storm of 1998 or the Slave Lake wildfire of 2011.
Folks, this is the Calgary Police Service.
Out of all this darkness, though, more proof that Albertans are a special breed.
We'll rebuild the shattered lives beneath the clear and blue Alberta skies and share the sun again, come hell or high water.
Perhaps it's what's left of our frontier spirit, but suddenly Albertans were falling all over themselves trying to help neighbours and strangers alike. An army of volunteers appeared overnight, moving from home to home without request, gutting and cleaning and literally saving homes that had appeared beyond salvation just hours before.
All heroes came, they risked themselves for those they saved.
At the head of this populist parade was Calgary Mayor Naheed Nenshi. A master of common sense obviousness and a natural communicator, Mayor Nenshi's approval rating soared, just in time for the October elections. Calgary's emphasis was on empowering people to recover. Evacuation orders were lifted as soon as possible, and residents in the hardest hit areas were back pumping out water and restoring their homes within days. The former university lecturer became the face of a textbook case of crisis well handled, by letting the people help themselves.
So we are 5 a.m. on Friday as we go through this process together, and I've had the opportunity today to travel around to most corners of the city.
But Nenshi sits atop a professional organization of full-time emergency operations staff, police, fire, and emergency medical leaders that train together. They know each other and trust each other. They're well equipped and work out of a brand new, state-of-the-art emergency command center. Not to diminish Calgary's achievement, but Calgary was well prepared in advance to handle any disaster.
Folks, thank you very much. If you're going to stand here and yell.
Unfortunately, things were not going so well for another mayor, just 30 minutes south of Calgary.
Hey, you're not in charge anymore. Where the hell's disaster services? Come on, where the hell's disaster services?
No, not well at all.
Impeach you bastard!
No place was harder hit by June's flash floods than the idyllic foothills town of High River, the boyhood home of former Tory Prime Minister Joe Clark. There, the usually meandering Highwood River hit the town of 13,000 with a wall of water early on June 20th.
Hold on! Hold on, everybody!
Over the region's picturesque farms, historic ranches, wooded hills, and lakes, almost half the normal rainfall for an entire year fell in less than 2 days. Dams across the southern half of the province reached capacity and overflowed. The pump was primed for disaster. Unfortunately, it wasn't just the torrential rains. The winter of 2012-13 had been an especially snowy one along the Rockies' eastern slopes, and June is typically when the snow melt finishes. Pushed by the warm driving rains, the heavy winter accumulation melted all at once and came raging out of the mountains, surging into rivers already overflowing and onto fields supersaturated by record rain. The Highwood ran past stream monitors at 5 times its normal volume, maybe 6, until it slammed into the old Canadian Pacific Railway bridge near the center of town. There, the iron span, built in 1892, collected the trees, the boards, and other debris like runaway boats, coursing downstream and acted as a dam, diverting some of the more than 2 billion gallons of water, enough to fill 3,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools, into the historic Main Street and neighborhoods as far as 2 kilometers from its banks. Exactly what happened to the river that day, and precisely when and how the water moved, will never be known for sure. But just so you can see how completely devastated the town was, I want to show you this computer-generated model of the flood. It's a best guess and not 100% accurate, but it's pretty close. And this is what the municipality and province are using for their mitigation efforts for the future. Obviously, a town called High River is no stranger to flooding, and usually the train bridge, that's right downtown here, gets the blame for backing up water and causing flooding downtown. But you can clearly see that isn't the case this time. There was severe flooding, much worse than anything before, all along the river, before and after the bridge. But here was the big surprise. Watch what happens up here in the top right-hand portion of the screen. The water backs up further downstream, way past the town, and runs back south into the east side of High River, more than 24 hours after the flood started, in areas that have never flooded in recorded history. These are the hardest hit communities, not only because they never expected to be hit, but because the water had no natural outlet. It just moved in and sat there. Most of the downtown areas along the river drained off naturally after 2 days. But this area needed to be physically pumped out, and some of these people weren't allowed even to see their homes for nearly a month. This is part of that area of the map, the communities of Hampton Hills and Sunrise. These were the last residents allowed back in. Most of the homes here sat submerged in water well over the main floor level until this area was eventually pumped dry. Owners were finally allowed back in on flood day 26. Now, most of the residents would prefer not to live here anymore. Their structures were submerged in water that was contaminated with chemicals and sewage and who knows what else. And they sat in that during some of the hottest weeks of the summer. So understandably, residents are worried about their health. But so far, the province refuses to buy them out, preferring instead to remediate the homes, essentially to rebuild them from the inside out. This is flood day 140, and that work is going on right now. So as you can see, the destruction in High River was on a scale seldom seen in Canada, as an overwhelmed High River Mayor Emile Blockland said in frustration in the days following his town's devastation.
What you don't understand is we don't have a flood. We have a disaster. Floods are very easy to deal with. Water comes, water goes, and then we clean up afterwards. This is a major disaster we're dealing with. It's at the same level as the Slave Lake fire that devastated that community. That's what we're dealing with, and that is a major reason we cannot have residents return to the town of High River. It is simply not safe to be there.
So in the aftermath, the town was locked down, and the entire population of 13,000 was ordered by emergency officials to either get out or stay out of town.
You can go to the Nanton Curling Club or to the Lodge Hall in Vulcan, and they're staging it so that everybody doesn't arrive at once.
All but an estimated 300 complied. The rest moved with what they were carrying into makeshift dormitories set up in the arenas and halls of nearby communities, or into the homes of relatives and friends. It's important to the story of the gun grab that not one of those people was allowed back into this town to even drive by their property. Not even those residents whose homes were untouched by the fury of the Highwood, or those who could have saved their homes from severe damage by pumping out floodwater and backed up sewage within the first few critical days. It was 10 days until the first area was reopened as part of a staged reentry, and most residents were out for 2 full weeks or more. This is the intersection of 498 and Highway 2, the scene of some of the tensest exchanges between residents and officials. Also important to point out, the neighboring town of Okotoks escaped major damage, and it's only a 15-minute drive north from where I'm standing. It's a larger community than High River, well stocked with grocery stores, drugstores, banks, hotels, restaurants, gas stations, a Walmart, a Home Depot, an emergency care facility, even a Staples. Just as Calgarians were allowed to recover their homes during the day but had to live and shop in other neighborhoods untouched by the flood, Okotoks could easily have been used to supply and support High River residents cleaning up their homes immediately after the flood. But strangely, instead of allowing people back into areas of town that were free of water, even under the condition that limited services were available, emergency officials here decided infrastructure repair was their top priority, and things went downhill from there.
It's also important for us to get the business community going so that when you get there and you're looking for repairs to your home, you have a hardware store that's open, you have a grocery store that's got food on it, you got a drugstore that's open for your medical supplies.
It's only a little ways away. We don't need all that stuff.
Late June in High River, and the Alberta town is on complete lockdown, leaving frustrated and homeless residents to stew in the summer heat. Authorities set up roadblocks at every entrance, and more than 200 Mounties brought in from across Alberta enforce a no-go zone 24/7. Military armored vehicles patrol empty streets, and officers from the provincial sheriffs and RCMP sit under tents in the hot Alberta sun, turning back anyone and everyone who tries to gain entry. Helicopters even patrol overhead, making sure no one can sneak back in. There may have been good reason to keep people out, at least initially. Search and rescue efforts were still underway. In any disaster, there are always a pathetic few that will attempt to loot. 6 days after the flood had receded, emergency management officials from the province of Alberta estimated 80% of the town was without basic services such as electricity, water, and sewer. The mayor warned there could be sinkholes that would swallow up vehicles. Worse yet, the thick mud that choked High River streets was full of dead animals and feces, and it was beginning to dry in the warm weather that followed the flooding. If it began to powderize and blow around, returning residents might inhale significant amounts of airborne bacteria, or so the theory went.
We've got big problems in the town of High River. Basically, the town of High River is out of business right now. We have no infrastructure. We have no sanitary sewer. We have limited supply of water. We have no electricity in the community except for one small strip. You have no services in the community. You have no medical as in drugstores. You have no fuel purchasing.
Yet the same day that Lachlan insisted his town was unsafe for residents, because of the absence of a functioning gas station and the threat of airborne disease, a busload of reporters wearing surgical masks was driven into High River under military escort to view the devastation. And police officers, provincial emergency workers, soldiers, and utility technicians could clearly be seen from the barricades, almost all working maskless and driving around with little concern for sinkholes. Many frustrated evacuees wondered aloud why it wasn't safe enough for them if it was safe enough for journalists, bureaucrats, and utility workers. Even after the Slave Lake fire in 2011, when officials were offering the same explanations for not allowing residents to re-enter, the hospital wasn't open, there weren't enough police, no businesses were open to supply basic necessities, residents were at least taken on bus tours organized by the town and province to survey the damage to their neighborhoods and homes. In another bizarre attempt to justify their actions, officials in High River early on adopted a tactic of blaming the handful of residents who'd refused to abandon their homes and leave town, claiming that when they flushed their toilets, it was showing up in their neighbors' basements. So valuable manpower was being used to resupply and keep an eye on those who'd stayed behind. The overall assertion was that the selfishness of these individuals was actually delaying the re-entry of the rest of residents from High River.
I understand there's about 300.
Hold on, sorry, I know that. I think there's more than that, unless some evacuated since yesterday. I think at one point they were saying there's about 600 of us.
That was an argument that was essentially shot down when the media convoy ran into two holdouts who were just returning from buying snacks at the very functioning local gas station.
We're not hurting nothing, okay? There's military and everybody else in this town using the sewer systems. We're not hurting nothing. We're protecting our homes. We're protecting the neighborhood. If they'd let us out, we'd go to work, and we come back at night and protect our home. Plain and simple. They won't let us out. They'll let us out, but they won't let us back in.
So why was High River being treated so differently, targeted even? Frustration boiled over on Flood Day 7 during the daily briefing by Mayor Blockland and provincial officials at a checkpoint outside town.
There are different parts of the community that have voted a little bit better than others, and those parts of the community will receive access first, so we can get those people in their homes first. The rest of the community we will bring in as quickly as possible. It's also important for us to get the business community going so that when you get there and you're looking for repairs to your home, you have a hardware store that's open, you have a grocery store that's got food on it, you got a drugstore that's open for your medical supplies.
It's only a little ways away. We don't need all that stuff.
All those things we've got to have in place for you to be safe. We need to have the hospital and medical supplies in.
No, we don't, Emil. We don't need that, Emil.
Folks, thank you very much. If you're going to stand here, Emil.
What about you're not in charge anymore. Hey, you're not in charge anymore. Where the hell's disaster services? Come on. Where the hell's disaster services?
Enough's enough. No plan. Just unbelievable.
Wait again. Oh, I gotta go. I got another press conference. What the hell's the sense of going to one when you can't finish this one?
October's just around the corner.
Impeach you bastard.
Residents were legitimately concerned for their homes, their possessions in their town. They couldn't understand how the absence of a functioning grocery store was being used as an excuse to keep them out after the floodwaters had receded. They were responsible citizens. Many had experienced cleaning up from previous floods. Any town called High River is no stranger to flooding. Tell them what they could and couldn't do in town, and they'd stay out of officials' way while they tried to get their lives and homes back in order, bit by tiny bit. But that wasn't to be. In fact, something else was going on behind the barricades at that very moment. Something the police were keeping extremely quiet about. But not for long.
Just had enough of this. They just took a backhoe or a hoe and dug a trench from there to the river. This would be gone. This would be gone. Just dig a trench. Oh no. Why?
But even all this, the heavy-handedness, the miscommunication, the attempt to turn neighbor against neighbor, all the lame justifications, could still be shrugged off as nothing more than an overreaction by inexperienced local and provincial officials dealing with a stressful situation. Hardly the making of a charter violation, unless all those signs were symptoms of a bigger problem problem that finally surfaced at a checkpoint briefing the afternoon of the following day, Thursday, June 27th, the 8th day of the flood. There, the Mounties suddenly laid spike belts across the roadway entrances into High River before Sergeant Brian Topham admitted to the media that officers had seized a substantial amount of firearms. Why the spike belts? It seemed an unnecessary provocation to reporters on the scene that day. And why firearms? Sergeant Topham added, "We want to make sure that all of those things are in a spot that we control, simply because of what they are." That's an odd way to explain what police were doing. Police felt they had to control hundreds of guns simply because of what they are. Remember that phrase. Topham was one of approximately 200 Mounties brought in from around Alberta to help enforce the evacuation and find any survivors who'd been trapped in their homes. Or at least, the hunt for survivors was the official excuse for the presence of all those extra officers. A 3-decade veteran of the federal police force, Topham also added the spin-doctored excuse for the gun grab that appeared the same day in press releases from the RCMP's Alberta headquarters in Edmonton and on the K-Division website. Officially, the excuse given for scooping up as many guns as Mounties could find was, according to Topham, because people have a significant amount of money invested in firearms. So we put them in a place that we control and that they're safe. But residents had a significant amount of money invested in other possessions too, in artwork, high-end electronics, jewelry, passports, credit cards, even tools. Mounties didn't feel the need to secure any of those in, as Topham called them, places that we control and that are safe. But safe from what? And from whom? The key, as we'll see later, may be in Topham's admission that every gun Mounties could find was seized, his word, simply because of what they are.
I'm here because of the actions the RCMP took during the flood and how, hopeless we were to defend them, and how we were forced to leave our homes but then not allowed in to resecure our properties, told these searches were reasonable, but my home was in a non-affected flood area, didn't have any water, didn't lose power or water service the whole time, but yet they kicked in my door to the point where it was laying on the floor, couldn't even be resecured. So my house was left open for looters, for the elements, for animals or anything.
When it comes to the guns, we just grabbed stuff lying around, again, is an absolute fiction. We had guns in a safe that my husband brought up. The 2 that didn't work he left on the stairs, and those were taken. The ones that did work, and I don't know how many he had, but they were registered at one point, took up to our bedroom, which they then walked up the stairs, muddy carpet, the whole bit. I'm sure that's a familiar story. In our closet, behind some clothes, behind a guitar. Those were not just standing around, and it makes you feel a little uncomfortable. You're wondering, hey Stan, check it out, is what it feels like.
The state may have no place in the bedrooms of the nation, unless it's during a state of emergency, apparently. In which case, it's all right to head straight for the most private area of someone's home and root around for a while, until something that's been hidden is found. Things that, thanks to the recently dissolved gun registry, police knew were being kept somewhere in many High River homes. That does not pass the smell test for lawyer Rick Hemmingson.
Well, Lauren, the Emergency Management Act does not give the police any powers, period. There is no part of the Emergency Management Act that says upon declaration of a state of emergency, martial law shall exist. So it's just not there. There are some extraordinary powers given to the minister, and there are some extraordinary powers given to the local authority. But in the Act, the local authority is not the police. The local authority is the minister and council. So my understanding is that the politicians, provincial and local, deny authorizing the police to conduct door-to-door warrantless searches for firearms or anything else. So I don't understand, I don't think anybody understands how this purported authority under this legislation ends up in the hands of the RCMP.
What was happening in High River was so astonishing that even the Prime Minister's office and Alberta's Attorney General took the extraordinary step of intervening in an ongoing police action. Both cautioned the Mounties to end their searches as quickly as possible and return any guns they had taken as soon as they could. Spike belts are the most obvious evidence that paranoid Mounties and petrified provincial politicians were seriously worried about the situation they had created. Already, a court challenge was being organized by residents to force officials to reopen High River. Town doctors were warning about the imminent development of toxic mold in homes that were left stewing in the sun, and people were becoming very agitated at the checkpoints. It's not hard to imagine that, in the fevered minds of provincial bureaucrats, some of the angriest and most determined High River residents could be seen successfully storming the blockades, making their way back to their homes and barricading themselves inside, forcing the police into multiple armed standoffs. Maybe that's why the guns were seized, while Mounties claimed to be searching homes for survivors. And that, perhaps, was why residents were kept out of town for as long as they were. It would also explain the amount of damage done during forced entries. After the first few days of searching, officials said they started using locksmiths to open and then re-secure homes instead of smashing their way in. If they decided to double back in a sudden gun-seizing blitz, they likely wouldn't have taken time to organize civilian locksmiths. Officials insist to this day the evacuation and the gun grab were designed to keep the town safe for residents until they could return home. The implication all along has been that the guns were taken so thieves didn't steal them while residents were away. But maybe, just maybe, High River residents' guns were taken from their homes under the guise of emergency powers, not because Mounties wanted to help out and keep these valued possessions safe until their rightful owners could return. Maybe Mounties committed a spree of destruction in High River, in which they damaged more than a third of private residences, because they were simply worried that angry citizens would return and take up those arms against police, provincial politicians, and bumbling local officials. If the latter is the case, then the High River gun grab is one of the worst violations of citizens' basic rights in Canadian history. High Riverites were kept from their homes far longer than evacuees in any of the other 31 affected communities. Even residents whose homes and neighborhoods sustained no flood damage whatsoever were kept out for up to 2 weeks. Why? Why were Calgarians in many of the city's worst-hit neighborhoods let back in within 2 to 3 days, with a simple warning to please be careful, when in some cases they had to wade through 2 or 3 feet of water to get into their homes, even before power and sewer and running water had been restored? Yet High Riverites were told doing the same was far too dangerous for them. Was it because what started out as a search and rescue effort morphed into a gun seizure blitz as tension increased over the unprecedented act of locking an entire population out of their town? Not if you ask the RCMP.
Our instructions to our officers, and it's no different than in Slave Lake, was to seize firearms or to secure firearms that are found in plain view.
Why, if this was sort of a routine thing, in all of the, at least all of the RCMP briefings that I was at, never was this seizure of firearms mentioned? Why would that have been?
You know, over the course of the past 9 days, I've been asked hundreds, perhaps thousands of questions. It's never come up. And the security of these firearms occurred during the normal course of RCMP operations. It's not remarkable for us. Like I said, this similar thing occurred in Slave Lake. It's part of our operations.
Now that's just a classic reporter versus Canadian cop moment, but I want you to watch it again.
You know, over the course of the past 9 days, I've been asked hundreds, perhaps thousands of questions. It's never come up.
Seriously, The answer to the question was, because you never asked me the right question. It just never came up in polite conversation. Rounding up firearms from hundreds of civilians is such a routine act that it just never occurred to the RCMP that people might be upset. Despite being asked
hundreds, perhaps thousands of questions,
it never occurred to him to add, oh yeah, and by the way, we're taking your guns.
I think the bottom line, Lauren, in this is that the RCMP need to justify what they did. And it's not up to us to go on an Easter egg hunt trying to figure out where their authority could be. They're the police. They conducted a pretty draconian search and seize operation in High River. And you know, in my mind, what really I think outraged me and a lot of other people in Alberta is that these were people who fled for their lives. I mean, they were driven from their homes by the fear of injury and death of their children and themselves. Having locked their houses, and thought that things were under the security of our national paramilitary force, they're then kept out of their houses while their homes are ransacked. That happens in some countries, but this isn't one of them.
And there's one fundamental difference between what the RCMP did in Slave Lake and what they did in High River. After the fire, police only went into those Slave Lake homes in which the exterior doors were left unlocked. Homes where the owners had not registered with relief agencies were sometimes also entered, but only because police couldn't be sure whether someone was left inside.
We were told they were using the Slave Lake model. Well, Slave Lake's an isolated community of around 12 or 1,500 people. And yeah, it probably was easy to evacuate everybody. This is a town of 13,000 and multiple entrances and exits. And, you know, you got a town that's half damaged and half isn't. And, you know, fire's final. When something burns down, there's nothing you can do to remediate. But in High River, time was of the essence.
Greg Quisley's home wasn't touched by the surging Highwood River. The block he lives on wasn't even evacuated. But because he was outside of town when the evacuation order was given, he was barred from returning.
You know, I certainly understand the initial investigation to make sure people were safe, but I know my home was entered 3 times, and I probably would have had my door kicked in if my neighbors hadn't gone through my garage window and opened the door up for them.
His neighbors remained in their home, and 3 times on or after June 24th, his neighbors let the Mounties into Quisley's home. What could they have been looking for? There was no chance anyone was sheltered inside to ride out the flood. There was no flood on Greg Quisley's block.
This was my pride and joy, my grandfather's 1912 Winchester shotgun. It's a collector's item. I don't think it's been fired for 25 or 30 years.
The answer is in the fact that after the Mounties found a couple of old unloaded rifles behind a stack of boxes in a basement storage room, they never returned to Quisley's house.
303 rifle, again, that was just on the farm in Saskatchewan. Again, hasn't been fired for a long time.
Mounties were targeting gun owners, pure and simple, and Sun News has obtained notes explaining how.
Yeah.
That proof is still ahead. If the forced entries were about emergency management and not first and foremost about disarming High Riverites, why were homes untouched by the flood broken into? Homes that were high and dry, where the power, water, and gas were still on, were just as likely to be searched as homes where the first story was underwater. The beginning of the end of the nightmare couldn't come soon enough, and eventually people were let back into town to begin picking up the soggy pieces. But many also faced a surprising and unexpected amount of non-flood related damage.
It's a custom door. I went yesterday and had a quote done for it, $4,300. $4,300 just for the door. 50 days wait time to get the door after I order it. I have to pay before I order it. I've already put out $12,000 to $13,000 since I've been kicked out of my house. Where am I getting $4,000 to put a new door in here?
Runaround from various levels of government about who was going to pay the bill for these damages was the final straw. At a public meeting in High River on September 5th, resident after resident told of the brutal damage Mounties did to their homes, and the way it appeared Mounties were on the warpath for guns, and only guns.
I want to know what gave you the right to come to my house and look for something that belongs to me. I want to hear more about the whole gun issue. Doors be damned, I had one of them too. I want to know about the guns. I live half the year in Texas, and I tell you this, you pull a stunt like this in Texas, you'd be doing a lot more than standing there smiling.
I drove down from Edmonton for that meeting. I had to see and hear for myself what had happened here. And the stories and the emotion behind them, quite frankly, were shocking.
Over $1,600. Boy, was I angry. It's still not fixed. And it says here, protecting property. Hell, my property isn't protected.
We were not allowed or able to protect our belongings or our homes with our doors booted in, and we're not allowed to do so for several weeks and had to sit there completely powerless, waiting for someone to let us back in. Now, I thought I lived in a free country. What this whole flood taught me is that I don't. And I'm very glad that we have some politicians that are willing to look into this, because we have civil liberties at stake here. They are at stake.
To his credit, the brand new post-flood detachment commander, Staff Sergeant Ian Shardlow, stood and took what has to be one of the worst public dressing downs of a Mountie that has occurred in years.
That image of the RCMP has done a swan dive, and this did nothing to help. I am coming, I'm telling you now. And this idea about the RCMP officers that had their doors booted in, we have 2 on our street. Every door has been booted in but 2. You want to guess which 2? They're really nice guys, and if I was a Mountie, I would have protected my house too. I mean, if I work at Walmart, I get a Walmart discount. I guess this was a Mountie discount.
We recognized early on that the damage to the doors was going to be a significant issue, and I can tell you that I have lived and worked within the government for my entire life, 17 years professionally, and unfortunately some things are just difficult to deal with. And the numbers are correct, it's around 1,900. I'm going to suggest that it will probably stop before 2,000. At one point they were coming in at maybe 10 or 15 complaints an hour. They come in now at 1 or 2 complaints a day.
So that's 1,900 reported claims, representing the people that bothered to file a formal claim. The number could well be higher. Many residents may have just fixed the damage and got on with their lives.
I'm going to quote a member who is going to remain nameless, because I know you guys, gossip just as the rest of us do, and I don't want to get this person in trouble, but when I asked him why 2 of my doors were booted in that weren't locked, he gave me a wry little smile and he said, "Les, there's no better feeling than booting in a door."
I will tell you that I'm probably one of the nicest Mounties you've ever met. I have 17 years of service, and I have kicked in a lot of doors in my time. I worked on a strict drug unit for a while, and I've done some northern service, but I've helped a lot of little old ladies cross the street. I've helped a lot of people in school, so it's not that we're all a bunch of big bad bullies.
Still, doors were kicked in even where there were panels of glass next to the door that might have been broken instead.
It had a side panel like this?
Just like that, yeah. And glass in the door just like that.
So a hand could reach in and turn the deadbolt. High River resident Kevin Decker summed up the contradictions in the Mountie story.
I do own firearms, but I do have them locked down in a gun safe. They were still in the safe, but my house is left unsecured for somebody to go in and break into my safe. So therefore, their actions did not deem it reasonable for their search, because they left my house unsecure, which goes against their whole search and seizure to secure the home. So
that's a good point.
It makes me lose faith in our RCMP that they can just kind of go over our heads and go in and just kind of search and root around people's homes.
The meeting was organized by the leader of Alberta's official opposition, Danielle Smith, the MLA for the constituency, and a High River resident herself.
The staff sergeant who's now responsible for the area said that there's been 1,900 incidents. And the thing that alarms me are two things. Number one, I got a letter from Lee Cutworth, who's our property rights advocate, and he has confirmed that the RCMP said they did not act under the direction of any elected official, which means they were acting alone. And that concerns me. We have to make sure that when we have an emergency response, that our RCMP and police services are operating under the command of the Emergency Command Center. So that's one thing. But the other thing is, having acted alone, they now seem reluctant to actually pay for the damage that they caused. And the damage has been significant.
Sensing a political firestorm brewing, within days of the meeting, the local council stepped in to broker a deal between the province and the RCMP to pay the bills. None of them wanted to face this crowd during the October civic election. And consider this odd comment that appears to indicate a change in mandate on June 24th, more than 4 full days after the flood started. Speaking at the same town hall meeting, Staff Sergeant Shardlow made a statement, the significance of which was not immediately understood. When asked by frustrated townspeople whether any Mounties posted permanently to High River had their doors kicked in, Shardlow explained how local Mounties had been excused from the community and from duty.
What I'm suggesting to you, though, is that the High River members aren't the ones that made the hard decisions, whether they're borne out to be correct or not. And rather than leave them in a position where they may have to police the community after, right, in an unhealthy environment, every member that comes back to work in High River didn't work from the 24th of June to a significant period into July. None of them made the hard decisions. None of them opened your doors, kicked your doors, smashed your doors. None of them searched your homes.
Sergeant Shardlow would seem to be suggesting that the most damaging and intensive searching didn't begin until Monday, the 24th of June. That's day 5 of the flood. But we know for a fact that homes were being entered under a search and rescue mandate by at least flood day 3, the Saturday before. So for 2 days or more, homes were entered and cleared by local members, until suddenly they were relieved of all duties and replaced by officers from other parts of the province, so they wouldn't have to police the community, tainted by what happened after the 24th. So what happened on June 24th, flood day 5? Something must have changed. But what? We know Mounties began smashing down doors and targeting guns. We even have a videotape made by Mounties in which they are seen checking 5 High River homes. But there's something very interesting that's missing in the video itself. In the 10-minute handout tape, it shows police entering homes. The only thing we don't see is how they entered those homes. That part has been strategically edited out. Nearly 3 months after the flood, when asked why High River was targeted for gun seizures, not imposed on other communities, Alberta's Municipal Affairs Minister, Doug Griffith, said,
I'm going to be really frank with you. I was in 30 communities in this province that had significant flooding. I was in all of them at some point. I did a press conference in High River where I announced why people couldn't go back into the town. We discussed it.
That news conference was late in the afternoon of June 23rd, the day before High River Mounties were sent away and the door-kicking campaign began.
So I talked about all the risks associated with it, the health risks, the physical risks to people, and immediately following that, I had an individual come up to me behind the cameras afterwards and say, there will be civil disobedience if you don't let us back in 24 hours. And I said, you risk people's lives if we put people back in. And he said, trust me, we will storm the barricades, we will storm the RCMP, we will get into town if you don't take care of this in 24 hours.
Griffiths claims senior Mounties were within earshot of this conversation.
Well, I could see why the RCMP would be focused on public safety and be concerned about firearms and concerned about, especially when there was an assault. So I targeted. I was in the other 29 communities. I never had one threat like that, but there was a lot of frustration, and I'm saying there's a lot of frustration. But the RCMP have to take precautions, and people can say they targeted it, that community. I think it was just a matter of making sure that there was public safety.
But how would one threat of civil disobedience from one individual justify a mass search for firearms by police? One frustrated, angry resident threatens to storm the barricades, and that makes it okay? On August 16th, not quite 2 months after the flood, Dale McGowan, the commanding officer of the RCMP's K Division, which includes all of Alberta, sent a letter to the province's property rights advocate explaining his officer's actions in High River. In it, Deputy Commissioner McGowan said that while the RCMP was acting in concert with our partner agencies, it should be clear that we did not take operational direction from any elected officials or public service employees to enter in private homes and remove personal property. Maybe the Mounties didn't take orders from provincial politicians, but it sure seems one knew what the other was doing, and there was a nudge-nudge, wink-wink approval on the part of Griffiths and others. It may be pure coincidence that Griffiths claims to have been threatened on June 23rd and the door kicking began on June 24th, but it's just as likely the two are connected. There's no arguing the destruction from the June floods far exceeded even the worst-case scenarios emergency planners had thought up. It was an unusually destructive event, one that understandably overwhelmed local and provincial responders. So maybe, amid all the chaos and destruction, everything police and officials did in High River made sense to them at the time. Maybe this wasn't a deliberate violation of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms and of ancient laws protecting private property. Maybe this truly was nothing more than ordinary bureaucratic ineptitude coming face to face with overwhelming circumstances. But that seems unlikely. At the white-hot town hall meeting in early September, High River Detachment Commander Ian Shardlow made another staggering admission, one that has gone largely unnoticed until now. In addition to the more than 700 firearms Mounties had taken into possession at one time or another, Shardlow explained the force had also confiscated 7,500 pounds of ammunition. I'm not a shooter, so I asked some firearms experts how many rounds that might be. A rough estimate is that that's 500,000, 500,000 rounds of ammunition. Shardlow claims it was destroyed because it was compromised. But even at 50 cents a round, that's $250,000 destroyed without a warrant, without the owner's permission, without cataloging or compensation. The Commission for Public Complaints Against the RCMP is an independent body set up to make sure Mounties stick to their own guidelines and follow the law. They're actively investigating the forced entries and gun grabs in High River.
I mean, the short answer to your question is yes. We'll be examining those individual incidents against the standards of the law, procedures and policies of the RCMP. So were each of these individual entries justifiable? Were they required? It's a complex matter, and you know, you've touched on the sheer number, which is what adds another level of complexity to our investigation.
RCMP Commissioner Bob Paulson himself asked for the independent investigation. But now, so many private citizen complaints have been filed, an initial report expected in December has been delayed and won't be released until February. One source even told Sun News that, quote-unquote, commissioners are overwhelmed by what happened in High River. I'm not interested in impugning the Mounties' motives. I don't want to be right about the High River gun grab. Despite all the recent controversies, from the fatal tasering of a man in the Vancouver airport, to class action allegations of rampant sexism, to the handling of native anti-fracking protests on the East Coast, the Mounties remain a respected national institution. And I'd like to keep it that way. I grew up on the prairies where the only things every small town had in common were a curling rink, a Chinese food cafe with laminated countertops and spinning stools, and a detachment of salt-of-the-earth Mounties. They lived next door. They fished with our fathers in summer and hunted in the fall. And in winter, they played rec hockey for the local team. That connection and respect for the thin red line still exists in rural Alberta. Just look at the memorial to 4 slain Mounties in the northern Alberta town of Mayerthorpe. Unfortunately, the deliberate ambushing by a demented and armed local may also have marked the beginning of a growing paranoia in some members' minds about gun owners, even law-abiding gun owners.
The only way it would work is if they took it out of the RCMP's paycheck, the guys that were kicking doors. Then it'll work.
So what happened in High River? How did the Mounties of my youth become the door-kicking, gun-grabbing bullies of that flood-stricken town? And why send all the local High River Mounties out of town? It's almost as if commanders had decided to up the destruction level of their house-to-house searches, and they didn't want their High River members to see what was going on, or to be on the hook after it was over, a sort of plausible deniability. High River was under a state of emergency at the time. But while a state of emergency gives police some temporary additional powers, there is no legal justification for subjecting 1,900 families to arbitrary searches and seizures of their private property based on the ravings of a single individual. A state of emergency does not suspend basic legal protections. For instance, during disasters, while police may be able to enter homes without warrants looking for survivors huddled in a closet, they may not, at the same time, go on fishing expeditions for evidence of crimes. The vehicles in your garage are fancier than your income would indicate. Are you sure you're reporting all your finances to the Canada Revenue Agency? It's even doubtful whether a drug possession charge would stick if police found your stash of weed while they were searching for your stranded kitty cat.
It simply can't be up to the police to interpret the charter and decide when it applies and when it doesn't. It can't be up to the police to decide when they need a warrant and when they don't.
Section 19 of Alberta's Emergency Management Act authorizes the minister in charge to take some pretty draconian measures. For instance, he or someone delegated by him, such as a police officer, can, quote, conscript people to help with emergency operations or force citizens to render aid. He can control or prohibit travel to or from any area of Alberta, or cause the evacuation of any area. The minister can even authorize the entry into any building without warrant by any person in the course of implementing an emergency plan. But the salient fact here is that no one, not even police, may conduct warrantless searches under Alberta's Emergency Management Act without the expressed authorization of the minister. And Alberta's Municipal Affairs Minister, Doug Griffiths, who was in charge during June's floods, insists he did not give permission to police to go rummaging around in High River homes looking for guns. And the then commander of the Mounties in Alberta, Dale McGowan, claims he and his officers were operating without direct orders from provincial or local authorities. So at least under the province's emergency laws, the RCMP gun grab would appear to be illegal. But what about under federal law? Section 117 of the Criminal Code permits warrantless searches, especially for firearms, where, quote, it would be impracticable to obtain a warrant. In the early hours of the High River flood, when the waters were still rising and police were frantically rushing from door to door looking for endangered survivors, it might well have been impracticable to get a warrant to take the guns they found in the fear and confusion. But what about 48 hours after the fact, or 72 hours? Admittedly, a state of emergency still existed, but the federal courts with jurisdiction for High River were open and functioning. The seizure of firearms went on for 7 or 8 days. Surely it would have been possible for the Mounties to seek at least a general warrant to cover what they were doing. But there's no evidence they even tried. The RCMP took firearms from around 100, a little bit over 100 homes. Would they then have to file a report to a judge for each and every one of those?
That's right. That would be required. Each house would have to be assessed, and they would have to state the reason why they went into it and what threat that individual, the homeowner or occupier of the home, was to themselves or someone else in the community or a family member. They had none of that information to start with.
In the past, Canadian courts have ruled that making such reports to a judge is an essential safeguard against the invasion of privacy. Moreover, failing to file those reports within 7 days is a violation of the Charter that invalidates any criminal prosecutions arising from such seizures. Gun owners would not be charged with unsafe storage, for instance. Police could even be liable to civil lawsuits or criminal charges for their actions. Whether under provincial or federal law, Mounties in High River would appear to have badly abused their legal authority.
After reading many of the emails that went back and forth between the RCMP through the Information Act having talked with many of the individuals, I've come to the opinion that this was done without the color of law behind it. This breached the charter. It is a scandalous affront to police behavior, and that there needs to be some discipline applied to these officers. I think it needs a judicial inquiry where a judge can issue sanctions.
No doubt, the realization their powers are limited is why the term "in plain sight" was so crucial to police in High River, and explains why they used it so often. On the hot June afternoon, when Mounties laid down spike belts to keep High Riverites out of their own town, and Sergeant Topham stepped to the microphones to announce his fellow officers had seized a substantial amount of firearms from homes while residents were under forced evacuation, Topham said the large quantity of firearms were left by residents in their places. Later that day, and for weeks afterwards, in their places morphed into the more legalistic "in plain sight." So committed were Mounties to this cover-your-ass wording that they eventually came up with a rather bizarre definition of "in plain sight." Speaking to Sun News in August, RCMP spokesperson Sergeant Jose Veliquet said that guns in a closet behind a stack of boxes could be in plain sight.
If you see a firearm that is in a closet, maybe if you stand in the middle of the room, you would say it's not in plain sight, but as soon as you open the closet door, it becomes in plain sight.
But once again, her tone betrays the mindset among Mounties that unsafe storage is a serious crime. They feel compelled to enforce it anywhere and everywhere they encounter a case.
The RCMP knows that gun owners are low-hanging fruit. They have easy charges that they can lay under these storage regulations. There's no defense. And it gets, here's how bizarre it gets. I came across a case from BC a while back, and if I didn't read this, I would think somebody made it up. A fellow in BC was convicted of unsafe storage because he had ammunition too close to the firearm. But here's the thing, the firearm was a .22, the ammunition was shotgun shells. The judge upheld the conviction because there was no evidence that the firearm couldn't be modified to accommodate shotgun shells.
So 4 months later, you've got a nice new door.
Yes, just got it 2 days ago. Yeah, yesterday.
Congratulations. The experiences of Dawn and Jane White and Greg Quisley show just how obsessed Mounties were, in this time of crisis, with using the cover of a major natural disaster to punish law-abiding gun owners.
Their note is that they forced my door down, entered my home, searched my home, took my guns, threw them in a boat, took them to the police station and secured them. And all this took less than an hour.
The Whites' home, a trim family house on a new street, was among the first searched after the severity of the searches escalated on June 24th. And there is no other way to describe the Mounties' mission. They targeted the Whites.
The police left their boots on and their gloves covered in mud, and it was dirty, filthy sewer mud that they picked up coming in. And they tracked it through your door, up your stairway, and it was like inches deep. It wasn't just a slight skiff. It was horrible. It covered the entire stairs from side to side, save a couple of inches. As they tracked up the stairs, they went into the bedroom. They looked obviously under the bed because their boots touched the bed, their hands touched the bed. There was mud all over that, mud on the closet door, mud up the walls.
Jason DeCoste, a constable from the Lloydminster Detachment, kept notes obtained by Sun News, showing that an undetermined number of officers got in a boat at 6:50 p.m. on the 24th. They went directly to the Whites' address, found the door locked, executed a hard entry, that is, they kicked the door in or battered it down.
Police, anybody in here?
Then they searched the residence. Constable DeCoste makes no notes about any other actions, but he provides detailed descriptions of the 11 firearms Mounties located. 17 minutes after the Mounties arrive, they are back in the boat with the note, "All firearms seized, placed in boat." There's that word again. Seized. Not taken into possession, not acquired, retrieved, or picked up, but seized. By 7:41 p.m., the gun-grabbing Mounties were back at the detachment with Don and Jane White's guns already locked up in the secure bay. There's no indication officers went anywhere or did anything else. Just straight out to the Whites to grab the firearms and right back to HQ. It's possible most Mounties aren't even aware of how infected they've become by this us versus them mentality when it comes to seeing ordinary citizens as the enemy. But they are infected nonetheless. Long guns, rifles and shotguns, no longer have to be registered. And the information in the Liberals' controversial registry was supposed to have been destroyed in November 2012. But police obviously have some electronic way of accessing who had registered guns and what guns those were. But how did Mounties know which homes and families to single out? The registry database was supposed to have been destroyed a year ago. The most likely answer is CPIC. The Canadian Police Information Centre computers very likely contain info on who has a firearms license and which license holders had guns registered to their names. It's critical to the legality of what Mounties did to determine whether they made use of CPIC or some other database to compile a list of possible gun owners in High River. Remember, police have extraordinary powers during times of emergency, but only to the extent they need those powers to save human life and prevent the destruction of property from getting worse. They can't use the emergency as pretext for other police agendas.
When the long gun registry was thrown on a manure pile, as it rightfully belonged, we know that the firearms officers in provinces tried to keep it. And so you had the will of Parliament on the one hand, and you had these bureaucrats called firearms officers, which a lot of them are actually retired police, deciding no, that they would keep that going. So with that in the background, one wonders how the stories about targeting certain homes, so if they were targeting certain homes, then how?
Strictly speaking, in a disaster, the Mounties' emergency powers do not grant them authority to make special, targeted searches of private property. If, for instance, they used police computers to identify which houses to search based on which owners had firearms licenses, rather than basing their decisions on which homes were most likely to contain survivors, then they very likely overstepped their mandate. They should have had warrants, but didn't. So if the gun grab wasn't about survivors, and it wasn't really about safeguarding possessions, what were the Mounties' objectives and motives? It's hard to escape the conclusion that Mounties took the guns of High Riverites, and only of High Riverites, not the residents of any of the 31 other communities affected by the floods. It took their guns because they feared violence from residents when they were given the all clear to return to their homes. And why did they reach that preposterous conclusion? Because 20 years of enforcing Ottawa's gun laws has left the police paranoid about law-abiding gun owners. The police now see law-abiding gun owners as dangerous as drug dealers with guns. I don't want to be right about what happened in High River. I don't want to believe our respected national police force has descended to the point where they see Canadians, the people they're meant to serve and protect, as the enemy. But the magnitude of what went on in High River, over a third of all homes violently entered and searched, and the duration of the hunting expedition, at least 7 or 8 days, far longer than needed to account for any survivors, and the specific nature of the police searches, only firearms were taken, no other personal property, leaves me to conclude that the High River gun grab was a violation of citizens' rights on a wide scale, a scale with few precedents in Canadian history. The forced entries and seizures have done nearly as much damage to the public's faith in the RCMP as the flood did to this beautiful foothills town.
The RCMP did something here that I would hope all of us as Albertans find repugnant. It's up to them to justify under what authority did you do this. Because if it's simply because we could, or because we have the force and decided to use it, that can't be good enough.
So the warrantless gun grab and the destructive forced entries happened. And they happened on a community-wide level, all in the name of public safety. The best way to make sure such an abuse of authority doesn't happen again is to get involved. The Commission for Public Complaints Against the RCMP is currently investigating the conduct of Mounties in High River. If you have information that you'd like to share about what happened this summer, you can contact the Commission in a number of ways. You can go to their website at cpc-cpp.gc.ca and fill out an online complaint that lets you submit the information electronically. You can also contact them by email to file a complaint or for general inquiries. And there's also a 1-800 number you can call from anywhere in Canada. Sun News will be following this investigation closely and will keep you updated on any new developments. Thanks for joining us. I'm Lorne Gunter.